Hi, guys. This is Rachel in recovery. We've got a special guest coming back to tell the rest of her story, Hannah. Thanks for coming back, Hannah. We're going to just start off with the questions.
I want to talk about a little bit about your financial abuse that you experienced. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it kind of goes with like fundraising stuff. Everybody specific amounts of money that people like raised, and so everybody raised money together. So like even if I had reached my goal, then if Sally hadn't reached her goal yet and was needing help, I was raising over my goal to cover her costs, which kind of in theory is how like fundraising works, but we weren't fundraising as a group. And like there were group fundraising opportunities, but when we were specifically like going home for 2 weeks and talking to people and receiving donations to like go on this trip and into our like accounts to pay for it, we were expected to raise more if somebody in our group receiving updates weren't reaching their goal. And any extra money that we raised wouldn't like be returned to people and say, oh, we raised, we're over our goal, or even returning money to people if we would reach like way over our goal. I guess some people would have donated it back to the organization anyway and helped with other fees, but it necessarily wouldn't go to our outreach trip. It could go to anything on the base.
Oh.
So like in any fund, if we raised extra money, which I was like, that's really weird, but okay. Or any money left over from the trip, which there might be. You never know. But wouldn't be credited towards us back. It would go back into the organization. And I'm not saying that everybody that donates, like missionaries need like support and stuff, but the people on the base, like the base doesn't pay them. So like the organization doesn't pay you to be there. Like you have to raise your own support to be there. And so then the base pays you kind of like you're an independent contractor.
Yeah.
But you're kind of not really. And so like some places do it that way, some places don't. But that was just kind of weird. But then after I left, they sent me a bill for a plane ticket, a non-refundable plane ticket that I never used. They charged me for letters, envelopes, stamps, papers like the letter, like printed that I never sent out. Like I had addressed all of my letters to who they were going to, including the return label and stuff, all of the letters, but I hadn't put any postage on it. No, I hadn't gotten the letters yet, because that was another thing. I didn't get my letters yet because they said that there was a problem with the last group being printed, but I knew it was all on me, and they were waiting for me to like submit to them and say, yes, I'll do this. These are my final numbers, and I never did. And so everybody else received their letters except for me. And I was like, this is not right. And so they charged for all of that. And I was like, I never sent them out. And they're not even stamped. Like, they're not viable to use. And so they charged for that. And then they charged outreach fees occurred on my behalf. So, like, transportation and food and stuff like that. Like, obviously, you have to set things up. But, like, I spent 6 weeks there. And there's more than enough money left. Because they have a percentage breakdown of, like, if you leave, how much money you'll get back. And so by week 6, you don't get anything. But if I left in week 5, I would get 20% of that money back. And so, like, the breakdown was kind of weird. And I was like, I should have fought it, but I didn't. I paid it and was like, I'm done with you. Like, get out of here. But they weren't specific about it in the beginning. They're like, these are outreach fees occurred on your behalf, but it wasn't itemized. It wasn't broken down. It was like, here's this lump sum total of money that you need to pay within a month. And my parents and I were like, this is weird. And so they called the base leader and was like, we need an itemized list of like what this is, because we're not just going to pay a bill. It wasn't even listed like, like a medical bill that has things broken down of what cost what. Like, that's what they were expecting on this invoice. And even on an invoice, if you get work done, it breaks it down. There was no breakdown until we specifically asked for it. And then they're like, pay it in a month. And they didn't threaten anything else. But like, we took time to pay it, but then they're like, well, then they threw the contract back and said we were expected to pay this. But I was like, I never actually went. Like, there's nothing here. I never raised any money so far, and you still have all of my tuition, which was like $3,200. So like,
Wow. That's a lot of
yeah,
money. That would have been a red
yeah.
that would
So
have been a red flag for me. I mean, I went and studied in Italy for that much.
yeah. And so I'm like, you still have all that money, and like that includes like room and board and materials and stuff and food. But you're like, you still have all that money, and I'm sure you have plenty of money to cover this. But they had me pay for it, and I was like, fine, we're done with it. That's it. Bye. See you later. And I never heard from them again. So, yeah.
Well, I don't know if I would have actually paid it. I would have been just walked away, and I don't know. So
I wanted to, but my mom's like, you have to pay this. You like did this, and we eventually got them down to where I can only pay for the non-refundable plane ticket. But I'm like, I didn't even like get a credit for it, no, from like the airline or anything. So it's like they bought a non-refundable plane ticket, and I'm like, that's all them. Like, you don't buy non-refundable plane tickets unless you absolutely know you're going.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I know your mom's trying to do the right thing, and those situations are just tough to figure out what is the right thing to do.
Right, and nobody really knew, and we're like, what was going to happen if we didn't, and we're like, we'll just pay it and be done with it, and that chapter of my life was over.
Okay. Tell us about the trouble you got in for questioning authority.
So they have like weird rules too. So like we had the base itself, some of the classrooms were in a church, so like next door. And so we kind of had like a quote unquote dress code of like what was like presentable, and everything had to edify or glorify God. So in our like clothing too, and like I wore sweatpants one day, but they weren't ratty, they weren't tatty, like they weren't old, like they were decent sweatpants, and I wore a sweatshirt, like there wasn't an old one, it wasn't tattered, it wasn't ratty. And they're like, well, I'm not gonna ask you to change, but I could if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. But you're violating the dress code because I wore sweatpants and a sweatshirt to class. Like, okay. I can't be comfortable one day. And they're like, well, it doesn't, we want to keep up our appearance that we're godly people and we look like good to be here because we're renting this space from this church. Kind of what it comes down to.
I'm sorry.
And I was like, okay, that's really weird, but, right? Why would you say something like that? They didn't really like punish me, but when I would ask questions, they would like spin it and turn it back around and making it my fault when they're the ones like they're protecting themselves. And I just kind of stopped and like let them do their antics and be like and just blew them off.
Can you give us an example of that?
It was mostly so my like small group leader, she would say like in the Bible it says to not be prideful, and I was like, yes, I do know that. Like, Jesus talks about that, and I don't think in the situation that I am, I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from, and I never got solid answers, though they always just spun it back around to them and wrapped it around and used scripture and be like, this is where it says this. And I don't remember specific scriptures, but they're like, this is what you should be doing, and you should be taking it to God daily, and you should be laying at the foot of the cross. And I was like, I do, but like I wasn't showing visible like, yeah, I'm a Jesus freak, like I am, but not like kind of throw it in your face and like have all these scriptures memorized and be like, this is for this instance. I'm like, I don't do that, and they're trying to get me to submit and be like, well, you said and blah blah blah, and I'm like, but I didn't. You said that,
So gaslighting you.
Pretty much, yeah. And they would like they kept me from local outreach too, which was weird because we're supposed to be like serving our community, and then you're like, instead we're gonna have a one-on-one, and you and I will miss local ministry when we're doing what Jesus told us to do, is like serve others. And I'm like, what's the point of this? There's no point. Like, we're
What?
it's a double standard. You're like, you're wanting us to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and yet you're holding me from that because I was like refusing to change some numbers that you thought were prideful, that I was being prideful about it. So you're going to hold me from this experience to serve others, but yet here we are, and we're like going to have a conversation that's going to get us absolutely nowhere.
So
And like,
ostracizing you because
yes,
you weren't a robot.
yeah,
That's frustrating.
oh, it was. And I'm like, I'm 20 by this point, and so you're like, you know, I've been around the block enough to be like, are you sure? Like, what are you trying to achieve here? And I even like said that, and they're like, well, we just wanted to make sure that you know that when we deem fit, you'll get your letters. I'm like, that's not the point. That's not the point. That's not why we're here.
No, it's not. No, was there any specific poor doctrine that really...
Well, I'm not against scripture, like, memorization by any means, but, like, we had to memorize specific scriptures, and they liked Philippians a lot, which Philippians is a good book, but they liked anything that Paul wrote, so, like, all of the scriptures that we, like, were to memorize were from Paul's writings, from his letters, and a lot to the Philippian church, and if we didn't have it completely memorized, they would quote-unquote dock points from us. Or like whatever, that if we didn't get so many scriptures memorized, we wouldn't graduate the school. And like even the whole time like we're doing supplemental stuff, like we were to pick a gospel and read through it and answer questions, then maybe it was all four. I don't know. Which would be a lot of reading. But we have to like go through the gospels and like answer questions like on our own time too. And we were to have that completed by the time that we were to like graduate, so to speak. And like if we didn't, like they wouldn't let us graduate. So I don't know if anybody had not done it. But they did a lot of forced quiet times too. So in the morning, we would get up and then have an hour of quiet time, and then we'd like go to the school for the day or the class for the day, and then not come back till after dinner time, because we were there like all day because the housing wasn't on campus other than the guy's house. And we just spent all of our time there. Like there wasn't hardly any time to ourselves. And even if there was time for ourselves, like people didn't want to go out and explore the city. So you're in a new city and you don't want to go see things that you live in, like you live there, and you don't want to do stuff. Like that's a little weird.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, I mean, I know when our church would do ministry or whatever, I mean, they take us to go do stuff around the, the cities and things that were unique to that area,
Yeah.
If you were like...
And that's kind of what I was expecting. Like, I had been on mission trips before, and like we'd have free days and do stuff around the city and like see stuff and meet new people, but that did not happen there.
Well, and then
I'm trying to think of other examples. Like, we did a Father Heart of God like teaching, and I thought it was kind of weird. And like to specifically like get to the Father Heart of God and understand what God's like heart is for. Like I know it's like for us, but it was like an entire week, which was kind of weird in my opinion. And like this random guy, who's like a big guy, like over 6 foot, and like big dude, came to like teach about it. But then at the end of the week, like the people would start bragging about something during the Father Heart of God week, like you'd have a cry fest. And it's just like the most cathartic thing, and they were like hyping it up, love bombing it kind of thing. And you're like, okay, like I know crying is a good thing, but like why would this like be a communal cry thing? Like you know, um, it was weird. And so, like, here's this guy that's, like, talking to each one of us. Like, we're in silent prayer and, like, just being there in this room. And here's this guy that's, like, standing in front of us and is like, I'm like, he goes, this is God giving you a hug. And you're like, okay, well, I don't know you. Like, I don't mind giving hugs, but here's this man, like, giving me a hug saying, this is God healing your heart. And he sees you and he loves you. And I'm like, I don't need you to tell me that. And especially, like, other people in the group had experienced, like, other things in their past, like, being sexually assaulted and stuff like that. So, like, that can be extremely triggering for people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, most definitely.
And yeah, and I was like, this is weird. And then they liked to make people feel like ashamed of like something about them, like they wanted us to give their like darkest like secret or like something that like only your closest friends would know, but like we hadn't known these people very long, and so like they're like forcing us to be close, and like people are saying like all these things, and I'm like, I don't know you people. I don't want to share lots of things with you. Like, it's only been a couple of weeks, and no. And I didn't. I didn't want to, or even if they made me, it was some stupid thing. But people, they were like really taken aback by it. They're like, why are we doing this? But then, you look back on it, you're like, oh, it's just a way for forced inclusion. Like, everybody knows everybody, and then nobody can say anything bad about each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and they want you to build intimacy, but if intimacy is built too soon, then it crumbles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then they also made the whole class agree that we were to stay, like, single throughout the whole, like, course of the school. And if we wanted to start dating, it had to be, like, ratify is not the right word, but checked by, like, other people around us and, like, other leaders to, like, make sure and that we're on the same page that, like, a boy and a girl could be together or, like, date. And then there are other stories of bases and people, like, couples that came together that were engaged but not married yet. This didn't happen at my base, but I've read stories about it where their leaders were manipulating each person individually and saying, well, he doesn't like you because, and he told me that he doesn't like you because, and like separating them completely.
Oh, wow. That sounds very manipulative. And
yeah, and even though like we agreed that we wouldn't date each other during that, but by the end of it, there was multiple people that had gotten married or engaged or dating each other by the end of it. So
yeah,
I don't think there was a point. Like, it was always going to happen, and a lot of those people stayed. So like, if you aren't one of the ones that they want to be on staff, they won't bother you about it. Like, I was never really approached about being on staff, and I knew I wasn't going to be. That's something I wanted to do, and so that's something that I wanted to do. So I didn't, and they didn't pursue me about it.
Okay, one last question. What were some? I guess. How has this impacted your faith?
But I got back. I was at a different. I went to a different church when I got back. From the church that I grew up in. And I went there, and they were really familiar with YWAM, and they had never really heard of anything like that happening before. What happened to me, and they were like taken aback by it. But now they support a lot of people that go to YWAM, so I like don't go there anymore, and I'm leery about it. But it's impacted my faith in that you like hear in doctrines for so long. You're like, this is how you're supposed to hear the voice of God, and you're like, well, you can't tell me how I hear the voice of God, and like I know how I have to hear it. So like you're giving me all of these steps to say like this is how I need to hear the voice of God, or like this is how I need to enter intercessory prayer, and this is how I need to have a vision. And it's taken a long time to like not do that and be like, wait, I can totally like be in prayer with God and not have to like follow all these steps and be like, oh my God, this is how God talks to me. But like no, like I can sit and be like, oh yeah, in prayer now and be like, oh yeah, that's kind of how it's supposed to be, and more like natural and not forced. Like they wanted us to like force
Yeah.
to hear the voice of God. And now that I'm at a better church with better people and sound Christian friends, it's like I can put all that away and be like, okay, we're building this back from the ground up again. And even though I grew up in the church and knew things, it's like, oh yeah, there's a lot that has changed and happened in a short, like, 6-week period of time. Like, I do have quiet time with God, but, like, on my own time, I don't. But for a long time, I didn't because it was a forced thing. Like, we were forced to have this. And now it's not. I can just be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go read my Bible and spend time with God and, like, in the Word and, like, read it and actually enjoy it and not be, like, indoctrinated and, like, forced to do
Fair
things
enough.
anymore.
No, I can see that as a problem. Is there anything else you want to tell us before we wrap up?
I don't think so.
Well, thanks, Hannah, for coming on our show, and hopefully you can come on here for another reason later down the road.
Yeah.
But thanks for being here, and all right, listeners, you can always tune in next Thursday at 10 a.m., or you can always follow us on your favorite podcast platform, or you can follow us on your favorite social media platform, or you can come to rachelontrecovery.com. And if you're wanting to come on the show, just contact us on rachelontrecovery.com. There's a information page for that. And I will see you guys next Thursday. Thanks.